Welcome to the Kingsport Archives. We're so happy that you all could be here with us tonight. Tonight's lecture is called Turning Point by Jim Welch. Mr. Welch is a native of Kingsport and taught history in the Kingsport City Schools for 30 years, before serving 19 years as the executive director of the Elizabeth R. Griffin Research Foundation, a U.S.-based nonprofit organization that works nationally and globally fostering global health security. Upon his retirement in 2018, the foundation was transitioned to becoming the Elizabeth R. Griffin Program at the Center of Global Health Science and Security at Georgetown University Medical Center. During his tenure with the Griffin Foundation, Jim was the global ambassador for the International Federation of Biosafety Associations and was the first non-government organization member of the Global Health Security Agenda Steering Committee. Among his professional activities, he has been a member of the OIE Consultation Group on Sustainability, Biosafety, and Biosecurity, the advisory board of the U.S. National Institute of Health. He has also been a member and served as the Global Council of the International Federation of Biosafety Association, ABSA International, and the Law Enforcement and Veterinary International Conference at Interpol. He was the 2011 recipient of the John H. Richardson Award of ABSA International and is an honorary member of the Association of Primate Veterinarians and the International Veterinarian Biosafety Working Group. Mr. Welch was elected to the Kingsport City Schools Board of Education in 2019 and served 2 years as its president. He was inducted into the Kingsport City Schools Hall of Fame in 2020 and named a Rotary International Paul Harris Fellow in 2022. He has been a key speaker, instructor, moderator, and panelist at the professional and governmental conference, seminars, leadership programs, universities, and private companies around the world. He and his wife Vicki have 2 grown children and 5 grandchildren. It is my pleasure and my excitement that I get to introduce to you Mr. Jim Welch.
Thanks, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, guys. How are we tonight? Good? It's an honor to be with you in celebrating your 30th anniversary. It's nice to know that somebody keeps the treasures for the city. I just wonder how large our archives would be if most of us would take our attics and just take them to the archive. I said Earl Carter, I was talking to Earl a while ago, just imagine the photographs this man has. What a history book that would make. And one of the things that I find enjoyable about this is twice this week that I've got to talk about Kingsport, which we're going to do. I got to talk to the Leadership Kingsport class earlier this week. But normally if you paid any attention to that long and boring introduction, when I gave a lot of safety day talks. You know, it was one of these things, I motivate people. But when people would call me to do a safety day talk, that meant that the fecal material had hit the fan somewhere. And I'm hoping that that's not the situation here. The other thing is to remind you that I did spend 30 years teaching middle school. I taught high school and summer school for several years, but I spent 30 years with middle school, and I don't know if I have any former students. I do have some former parents in here. But I can handle just about anything. One of my favorite things about talking here is I don't have to explain my accent. I was giving a talk in Beijing. That's something for a kid that grew up in Route 1 Fordtown. We grew up in Colonial Heights. My address when I started at military school was RFD1, Fordtown, Tennessee. And I have those thoughts often when I was doing things. And when I was in Beijing, the translator, I had an earpiece, and the translator said she could not understand my English. And could I please speak slower? I just looked at the booth. I said, ma'am, I'm Southern. You don't get any slower than this. So when I was in my history teaching days, I used to have up on the board or something, when PowerPoint came in, it made it a whole lot easier. But I used to have, for the day, you'd have the date. And what happened on that date that may or may not have been significant. So here's rule number 1 about history. The people who tell the story get to choose what to tell and what not to tell. All right? So understand that about history. For every story that's told, there is a story that's untold. Right? So a lot of things happened on today. Some of them made a big difference. Some of them didn't make a big difference. But we're going to talk about things that made a big difference. Mount Vesuvius erupted on this date in 79 AD. Probably one of the largest volcanic eruptions in the history of the earth. And it helped give birth to archaeology and studying the ruins of it. So this fella here, Anton van der Hoek, is the father of microbiology. He took a telescope, turned it around, and it's his birthday, 1639. This is the battle of, and I'm a history guy, and I had to, write down, how do you pronounce this? I had to study it. This is the Battle of Mali Yaroslavets, which is when the Russians beat Napoleon in 1812. It was for Napoleon what Stalingrad was to Hitler. And it's the reason Russians never spoke French, right? This picture right here is in 1871. We believe it is the largest mass lynching in American history. And it took place in Los Angeles, California, when a mob attacked a group of Chinese immigrants who, interestingly, were having a war with each other. And for some reason, some people got upset, and it turned into a horrible, horrible day. There was being anti-immigrant or something like that obviously is nothing new. This fella down here, this is Nathaniel Wyeth. Anybody know what Nathaniel Wyeth did? Oh, come on. I got a chemical engineer in here somewhere. He invented this. It's his birthday in 1911. This is probably the most produced consumer product in the world. Made a little bit difference. 1939, nylon hose went on sale for the first time and open to the public in Wilmington, Delaware. And they cost the equivalent of what is now $20 a pair. And women lined up. Now I'm going to get to something you remember. On this date, 1962, the Russian ships stopped and turned around. Remember that? Not Bay of Pigs. This was the missile crisis in Cuba. And this is when we believe we came as close to nuclear war as any time in our history. And the ships turned around. Now, the story that they didn't tell us until later was that we agreed to take missiles out of Turkey in exchange for that. And on that same day, James Brown's concert at the Apollo Theater in Harlem was recorded. And if you're a soul music fan, this is a must-have album. James Brown live at the Apollo Theater. So we're going to talk about turning points. I ran into somebody. I was at Food City. You can't get to Food City without talking to somebody, right? So I was in Food City, and they said, "You going to talk about that website?" I went, "No." So there is a conservative website called Turning Point. Some of you may be familiar with it. I'm familiar with it. This is not what we're talking about. All right? We're going to talk about things that happen that cause things to shift. Okay? This is what a turning point is. And this in history, this is basically the things that get in history books are some kind of level of a turning point. And we're going to talk about these like this, and then we're going to talk about Kingsport for a while. Is that okay? All right? So, turning points are nano to micro to mega, going up here this way. This first one is the first step, but what I want you to see is that when we talk about a turning point, it can start with a Nathaniel Wyeth, who invents this and ends up as this, because this is all over the world, and it's good and it's bad. Right? Okay? Starts here. Over a period of time, it gets to here. Or something can happen here, and it gets all the way down to here. This can be as simple as somebody getting married. Right? And that somebody getting married has an effect that just goes on and on and on. We could take tomorrow is the anniversary of John and Abigail Adams. How's that? Okay? Without Abigail, who would John be? And without John, who would Abigail be? Nobody would have heard her if she hadn't been John Adams. Why? And she wouldn't have had the influence if John Adams hadn't been John Adams. So there's two ways to tell that story then, aren't there? But they had a terrific impact on the history of this country as a couple. Okay? So it goes both, it kind of coats around here. Now, this is the pie, P-I-E. Easy to remember. The pie that generates change, people, ideas, and events. So we have people. Somebody does something. A person does something, or a group of people do something that causes something, some motion to take place, and it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows. Or we have an idea that we really can't put our finger on. So one of the things that we talk about in history is that change is a constant. It's the one thing that never ever stops, is change. And there's not a flippant thing we can do about that. Change happens. Okay? It continues to happen. We try to influence the pace of that change. We try to influence the direction of that change. We try to create a current for that change, but it happens. So when did humans first realize that change happens? We have no idea. But we do know that a Greek philosopher sometime in the 500 BC said something, and Plato picked up on it. So Plato gets a lot of credit for a lot of the early philosophy about change. All right? And then events. And some of those events can be natural. All right, so we have a new turning point in our region that we just lived through, didn't we? Now, stay with me here, and if you disagree with me, just know that I'm going to tell you this. You parked your critical thinking skills in a garage somewhere else. But a hurricane isn't a man-made event. It's just not. The idea of it, yeah, somebody patented the idea of it. But it's not a man-made event. Okay? It happens. And Helene took one huge swath. And those of us that used to sit around and go, I don't know why anybody'd live on the coast anyway. Found that doesn't make any difference. Right? And I probably won't live long enough to see all the changes that will come about as a result of that event. Now, on a global scale, Helene will just be a drop in the bucket. Okay? But to the people who experience it, to those of us who just came within 20 miles of it, I mean, we had a downed tree here and there, and our power went off for a while, and oh gee, you know, my cell phone didn't work for 2 days, and so we're not standing on a roof waiting for somebody to rescue us. So the stories that will be told out of that and passed on will be an important part of the history of this region. And it will be a turning point for several cities and communities that are in this region. This is a where do we go from here moment. And that's a turning point. Because we just go through life, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And we think that we can make some huge change by voting for somebody or not voting for somebody. And maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't. All right? So, we look at this. This is kind of what's a history class without a timeline, boys and girls. So think of these, this is an American history kind. Think of these as plot twists. Right? Because we look and we have, I love reading mystery books and see if I can figure out, you know, who the person is at the end. And I'm terrible at it. And if I figure it out, I just say, well, the book wasn't any good. But this is, when people are making some of these decisions, they have no idea. They're coming up with a solution for a short-term problem that ends up having a long-term effect. And I want to give you an example here. The Dred Scott case, which is one that you should remember from your high school American history class, had to do with the right of a slave to be free, and it's far more complex than that. And the decision was that Dred Scott had no standing with the court. Because Dred Scott was property, he wasn't a person. Which meant in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the government of the United States, it's property. And as property, had no human rights. All right? So that was an affirmation of a philosophy of the time that had long-going effects. All right. So we're going to look at modern 20th century stuff. And we're going to see how many of these things you can pick out. All right? I can't go past the flag. They told me this. So this one is, and they're sequential. This one is what, boys and girls? Pearl Harbor. Very good. These are, see? All right. This is Normandy, D-Day. It's the Normandy invasion. This is Hiroshima. Very good. This is Sputnik. Very good. Who got that? There it is. All right. Sputnik launch. Oh, man. Talk about changing things. Because all along in this kind of thing, like particularly this one, the Soviets had gotten everything by stealing it. But this, they were ahead of us. Uh-oh. Whoops. We get even. This one. This one. Where? Ed Sullivan. This one. Martin Luther King. Very good. This one. Aha. This one. This one. Reagan shot. This one. And this one. Yeah. All right. You passed. You know why you passed? Because for the most part, except maybe the Sputnik, now you know what else. Maybe if I showed you a picture of the little satellite they used to show for that, maybe you would have gotten that one right. But it shows that 4 generations deep, you are well acquainted with these significant turning points in American history. that they are part of in this crowd. Did you hear everybody responding to it? No secrets, no anything. Because as a result of each one of these things, life changed as we knew it. Okay? We had never had a president resign, because particularly we never had one resign, period, much less resign because he was involved in something that was criminal. Right? And Reagan was new into the presidency and highly popular, and I was mowing the grass. This one, I was outside playing football at Colonial Heights School. It wasn't a middle school then, it was just a hodgepodge of grades. Came in from recess, he'd been shot. And I bet all of you who were alive then can tell me exactly where you were. You could probably tell me exactly where you were on all these, and whether or not you got to watch this or not. Because that wasn't, some of these, my father wouldn't let me watch it. Okay? But even that memory of my father wouldn't let me watch it. After what, those long haired people? Look at that long hair on these guys. Sometimes change is not so instant, but it has an ongoing impact. This, in case you recognize it, is the Motorola bag phone. How many of you had a Motorola bag phone? If you're old enough to have a Motorola bag phone. All right, for $30, you got 30 minutes. Right? The Motorola bag phone was not an instant hit. Because we're talking $30 and $30 money back then, which made it for an expensive phone bill. And just to talk for 30 minutes, $1 a minute to talk on the phone, right? So this was kind of but the momentum slowly built. And then came the brick. Okay? And then the phones started getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And the smaller they got, the more popular they got, and the more stuff they would do. All that one would do is call somebody, and you'd be real quick about this conversation. This would be like, when telegrams started, here's you something to put this one in. When telegrams started, you paid by the letter. So abbreviations became really, really popular. Because if you were going to send a message, MSG is good for message if you're paying by the letter. Later, Western Union caught on and charged by the word, but by that time, the use of abbreviations had increased dramatically. Little turning point. What one of these things is used for now, the least, is as a phone. In time spent on it, at the very bottom of the list, it's a phone. Why do you need a phone? Just text them, okay? Then there was this. And it made a huge impact. But we paid no attention to it at first. This is something going on in Wuhan, China. And the next thing we knew, it was everywhere. Okay? And because it expanded so quickly, and affected so many people, we had no idea what to do with it. And pardon me, but we acted like idiots all the way through it. It's still with us. But part of the reason we had that reaction was because at first we paid no attention to it. No alarm bells went off. We really had no, and then all of a sudden we're looking for reasons why, and we've got people out there who suddenly are experts in epidemiology and everything else, right? And even the experts in epidemiology who are supposed to be able to keep up with this kind of stuff, they're looking through, I haven't seen this before. I don't know what's going to happen, which didn't help us any, right? Maybe this will work, maybe it won't, you know. Really, nobody knew if masks would work. They work with the flu. But until we learned whether it wasn't a contact virus, we had to clean everything off like it was. And when we learned the proximity of how the virus was spread, the whole idea of wearing a mask sounded good. Until somebody said, you have to wear one. Somebody said, oh no. Right? So this is when something happens that it's not so instant, but then it's huge, then watch the chaos occur. And we haven't recovered from the chaos of this. The misinformation, the malinformation, the purposefully, everything about that. People lost trust in every institution known to humankind. I look at, and you'll pardon me for looking at most of you for being old enough to remember the first polio vaccine. My parents couldn't get me to that vaccine fast enough. And then we had a vaccine for this, and it seemed as though people couldn't stay away from it. Different, isn't it? All right, telling history stories. Most of the history that we get, most of the history you get, not to the ones of you who like to study history and read books and all that. I'm talking to most of you, okay? Most of you that think, oh God, history is boring, I hate it, just a bunch of dead people, it's a bunch of dates I have to memorize. So most of the history we get that we actually enjoy, we get from oral history. We get it from our grandparents. We get it from people that we know. We get it from people who are telling us stories about what it was like when something happened. That's where most people get most of their history. And it's how most children learn most of their history. So if you ever teach history to a bunch of children, they'll tell you, that's not what my grandmama said. Okay, so you just go with what your grandmama said. I'm not going to argue with your grandmother here. But oral history fades after 3 generations. And what that means is that if you've got a grandparent telling you a story, when they go 3 generations beyond them, because they're then telling stories of their grandparents to them, those stories get faded and lost, and the details really start to fall out, except for a very few. Right? So you could tell a story right now very quickly about something that's happened within your generation. If you're talking about something that happened in your parents' generation and it's something they passed down to you, which if your household was like mine, then we never missed an opportunity for that. My parents were Depression-era parents, which meant nothing ever got thrown away, no nails, no screws, no nothing. Okay? And there's stories about that, particularly my father's. My mother's father was a manager of the Chattanooga City Water Works, so he never missed a paycheck. But my father's father lost his job with the railroad, and then they called him back to work, and then he got killed at work. And then, well, it was a work-related accident. And see, this is oral history. It's not written anywhere. This story's my daddy told me. So when I tell my children about my grandfather, I never knew either one of my grandfathers. When I tell them about my grandfathers, I'm telling them nothing. I didn't know them. I'm telling stories about who I was told they were. And if they try to tell stories about my grandfather that's going to be lost because it's too many generations down. They're going to remember very little about what I told them. Okay? So oral history, which is that, oral history is very, very important. And I love people who record people, who interview people, because they are those kind of sources. But the validity of the information they pass fades after 3 generations. And that's something to always keep in mind, because we get into this confusion between what is nostalgia and what is history. Okay? Nostalgia is an emotional kind of thing. It is our brain doing filtering to tell a story like we want it to happen and how we want it to end, good or bad. And sometimes in nostalgia, we adjust the facts and forget the facts and create new facts. We really do. It's not necessarily an intentional thing. It's just we kind of start to blend the stories together. And what comes out is not necessarily what is history. So when we talk about history, we're talking about things that are validated in multiple sources as much as you possibly can. And this is where things like the archives, which you're celebrating, the 30th, this is a source to go to. So when somebody says, well, my daddy remembers when they cruised Broad Street, or I'd say not granddaddy. I showed the Leadership Kingsport class a picture of that the other day. It was in 1968. I said, odds are pretty good. I'm in that picture somewhere. People cruising Broad Street. Okay? But that's the kind of thing we really remember more than anything else. Timing is everything when it comes to this sort of thing. So it is, I'm trying to put this in the right frame here so that I'm not misunderstood. The time and the place of certain things make those things what they are because of the time and the place they took place. Does that make any sense? Good, because I can't say it again. So something can happen at a time and in a place, and nobody pays any attention to it. That same thing can happen in another time and in another place, and it's the front page news. Now, does it make sense? Okay? So it's not just timing, it can be time and place. Somebody asks a question, well, they didn't show that on the news. Well, what else was the big story of the day? And maybe that's why they didn't show it. All right? It may be important now that you're looking back on it, but at that time, when it happened, it wasn't the big story of the day. It wasn't even in the top 5. Or something happened somewhere that got a whole lot of attention. I worked with the Griffin Foundation, had to do with the Griffin family, Carol and Bill. Many of you knew them and still know Carol. They established that foundation when their daughter Beth died of an ocular exposure to a macaque virus. And the whole idea was to improve occupational health and safety in research environments. All right? Beth wasn't the first person to die as a result of an exposure to something in a research environment. But when she died, it made the front page of the New York Times and made a story on ABC 2020. It was a time and a place, and people paid attention to it. Your results may differ. Listen to me when I tell you this. History does not repeat itself. There may be something that looks like something that happened before, but it's not the same thing. All right? So that's one way to look at it. All right? It may be coincidental. It may have a similar appearance. It may be almost a near clone, but it's not the same thing because the circumstances around it and the timing are much, much different. Does that mean that we won't keep falling for the same stupid things over and over and over? No. And that's where we get this whole idea of history repeats itself, because people do fall for the same sucker punches over and over and over. Okay? We also get made happy by the same things over and over and over. All right? So that's the way we think about history repeating itself. But again, remember that every story has another story. Okay? And one of those stories, somebody is doing, yay! Christopher Columbus discovered America. Yay! Other story. What were you thinking? It's not your land, it's theirs. Right? Okay? So every time you look at one of those stories, know there's two stories. One of the big things in politics now is what stories do you put in and what stories can you not put in? Right? And let me tell you this. When you take stories out that you don't want people to learn and they later learn them, they're not happy people. And if you were anything like I was and just took like basic American history classes or history classes coming through secondary school, and you went to college and you opened your first American history book, you went, whoa, that didn't happen. No, that's not the way it was. Because that was something that was left out. And it confuses you when you leave it out. So now we're going to do local. You ready to put the hammer down? We're going to do local. We're going to fly through this. And I apologize for not putting a picture of the Exchange Place or Rotherwood Mansion or anything. I just used Netherlands Inn. Is that okay? So just kind of bear with me. I kind of like that picture of the Netherlands Inn because I told the leadership Kingsport class, I love this book right here, by the way. And the way it describes the Netherlands Inn is kind of like the birthplace of the romance with business and industry in Kingsport. And that's true. Okay? It really was. And we've had two Kingsports. One was Kingsport, that was that way, and Kingsport, which is where you are now. Right? So this is oversimplification. But that old Kingsport was built around that. And that was built on logistics. And the way that really became a popular place is when it was a stop on the stage route, which is like in today, that's where the tour bus stops, right? So people from different places are coming through here. And it was also the port where people brought their stuff and put it on the flatboats to move it down the river. So logistics becomes a very important part of Kingsport, 2 words. And when we look at the Rotherwood Mansion, which the one you see now was the one built after the first one burnt down. When you look at that and know about the Ross family industries and things that were moved from that place, all right? So the logistics part here, our logistics affair was putting things on a flatboat down here on the Holston River and moving it downriver to other markets. So we were a flow-through place, and the logistics, the business of logistics was very important to us. And just follow that through our history, would you? Because the railroad is going to be a big thing. It's actually going to cause the end of Kingsport, but it's going to be the beginning of Kingsport. Whoa. And then we've got 2 major highways, the 2 U.S. highways that run through our city, north-south. We don't have any east-west, and we've got 2 major highways, U.S. 11 and U.S. 23. So when the automobiles, and they get these highways, these 2 major north-south routes, they don't only come through Kingsport, they intersect here. Yes! But the first time when the train came through, we missed it. Okay? It's a turning point for this city when we missed the train. When people were building trains everywhere, or at least they were getting money to build the trains everywhere, and there's now just all kinds of not built railroads out there from this, but they started building railroads anywhere, and your town died if you didn't get a railroad. Because the railroad got to a point where it was what was moving goods. And if it wasn't on a railroad, it was on a canal. So we had this big political thing. This is in the mid-18th or mid-19th century. We're slugging it out, and we make a deal. They're going to try to do something to get the river navigable for steamboats. That never happens. And Jonesboro got the railroad. Jonesboro? So this is what that stays. This is what we missed out on here, people. But when the railroad passed us by, we almost rolled over and died. That's a story to be told in and of itself. We became a nothing because nobody was moving things by flatboat anymore. And we didn't have a train, and US 11 and 23 are somewhere way off in the future. So what do we have to offer? Not much. Right? And because we don't have much to offer, you know what we got? We got cheap land. Because we got nothing else. We got a lot of cheap land. All right, so a guy comes along with a dream. He's actually resurrected the dream of Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina of building a railroad that runs east-west through the southern Appalachians. East-west, not north-south, east-west. All right? And so that fellow, George Carter, buys a lot of land in Virginia and starts this whole railroad thing. And you all have done all this stuff, right? So we can just kind of skip through some of this story. But here's the turning point in all this, is when he hires John B. Dennis, who's the financier of all this kind of stuff, when he hires this guy to draw up this. We're going to build a new town, folks. This is newsworthy. See, this is not the way you build cities. Cities are they just build themselves. There's just this, Jeff's a city manager. Cities start with, remember when 81 first opened? Those of you who were here when 81 first opened, there was nothing on the exit ramps. Nothing. And then somebody builds a service station, and somebody builds something else, and somebody builds something else, and before long you got Buc-ee's. Right? Which is a city in and of itself. But that's the normal pace of cities. The idea of sitting down and planning something where nobody is. We're going to attract people to this place. I was a Good Humor ice cream man one summer when I was back in college in Washington, D.C. I rang my little bells on truck number 47, which, by the way, was on display at the Smithsonian Museum of American History. My truck. All right. So I was trained on a route in Reston, Virginia, which was a brand new city. It was a planned city. We had the first planned city. You know, this guy, John Nolan, we said, I get to plan a city? Now, what I really think is cool, and I've looked at this thing for a long time, and you all probably knew this all along, so you're going to say, God, he's dumb. But when I was putting this thing together, and I've talked about this before, I had never noticed that every residential street on his plan, every residential street connects to a street that connects to Church Circle. Every street on there connects to the churches. All this stuff. This is his residential area. And it connects to there. Not to his train station, not to anything else. It connects to there. I thought that was kind of a cool little thing to notice. Well, this is all going to be, I guess where we are right now is cow pasture back then, right? So this was all, but this is part of the new city. And it wasn't just drawing out a city. It was drawing out how the city was going to be run. We're going to have a city manager. I think the first place to do that was Galveston, Texas. Is that right, Jeff? Didn't they do the city manager thing after the hurricane wiped it out and all the elected officials got killed or something like that? Really? I mean, they said, we got to do something else because this happens again. That was one of their turning points. They had a hurricane wiped them out. And so we got to do something to get things back going again. And we're going to have, listen to this, we're going to have an elected board of mayor and aldermen, and they're not going to be run by political parties. Whoa. Holy cow. Are you kidding me? How different could that possibly be? And here's what else we're going to do. We're going to hire somebody from Columbia University in New York City to design and develop our public school system. We're going to have first-class public schools in this little model city in the middle of nowhere. What do you think? Well, let's skip. John B. Dennis convinces this guy, George Eastman, to take over one of the factories, and we've become a production. We got factories, we got people coming here to work. We've got these businesses these factories that are becoming interdependent. It's really kind of cool the way it's developed. But this is the big one, because we have a factory that kind of, and it was distilling methanol, and so he talks George Eastman into taking this over. And if there's anything that people in Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia know how to do, it's make alcohol. Even if it's not the kind you drink, right? So you got a labor force that, yeah, baby, we can do that. All right? We can cut timber. We can do this. We can do this. Hey, we got this down pat. He found him a good workforce, found him a good factory, invested a lot of money in it, and it continued to grow. Interesting, isn't it? You ever think about the alcohol part? All right. Now, as we continue to grow, we're going to, in the Depression doesn't hit Kingsport very hard. Isn't that amazing? We actually grow during those years. We actually ignite our first community chest, which is they're celebrating their 90th. And I show this to you. This is the birth of what we call the Kingsport spirit, where people become civically involved and give money to things for the betterment of life in the community and all that. So here's your fun thing to do. The campaign goal was $23,000. Okay? A $2024 in that against that dollar is worth 4 cents. Because we were on the gold standard back then. But anyway, that $23,000 in today's money is more like $500,000. And the city's population was 11,000 people. I want you to extrapolate this with me. This is kind of fun. We have 5 times as many people there. Anybody know what the United Way goal was this year? 3 million. We have 5 times as many people. Not that much more in comparison to what those 11,000 people were raising in 1934. And they met, when they put this thing together, they met at the Kingsport Inn, which was our high-class hotel. That was our Marriott Resort. World War II is going to be a really big turning point, because it's estimated, I keep reading different things, between 15 and 25,000 people moved to Kingsport during World War II. That's an enormous number of people to move into a city of 11,000. One is there's no place for them to live. Okay? They are coming here mostly to construct Holston Defense, which they do at a very rapid rate, but they also work in production. And Eastman has a number of military contracts through its Clinton Engineering Division. So all this is going to be very important in the World War II part, especially since Eastman got involved in plastics and fibers toward in the latter part of the 1930s. But it was on a smaller scale than it was now. And we were still kind of viewed, I want you to try to understand this, we were still kind of viewed as a production town. We're a factory town. We were that way for a long time. You know, you gotta go through high school, you get out and go to the plant and get your job, whatever plant it was. You're a factory job. World War II is going to change that dramatically. And we're going to look at that because we go from production to creation when World War II is over. When World War II is over, a number of those people that Eastman hired for Clinton Engineering Works, particularly those who worked on the Manhattan Project in Oak Ridge, were transferred here. And research laboratories at Eastman went from being this to being this. And we started having people coming in from all over the country. And we began not only just making stuff, we're inventing stuff. We're creating stuff. We're having really smart people from really smart schools come into this city. And they're going to change our character dramatically. One of the little things that happens, just to show you this, one of the little things that happens is we don't have a Catholic church here until like 1946, something like that. Because here, before World War II, religious diversity was, what kind of Baptist are you? But after World War II, we have people coming in who aren't Baptist at all. All right? And that's an expansion of it. But among the things they did, the library was in this terribly small place. They said, you guys need a new library. Where's your orchestra? We need culture here. We need an orchestra. These are things that just you don't think about, right? This is a turning point for us. In 1947, the Kingsport Chamber of Commerce develops. We've had businesses all the way, but we hadn't had a Chamber of Commerce. The reason we hadn't had a Chamber of Commerce is because most of the business had been run by either people that were in the family of the families. But now we have all kinds of new businesses, and we need to be able to nurture an environment where entrepreneurs and businesses can flourish. And some agency to take care of that. And this is just a handful of the examples of doing that. Now here's the other thing. We're going to ramp up science and math in the school system in this city before Sputnik takes off. Wes McConnell's sitting here. Wes told me a story, belonged to the Jets Club. Is that right? At Robinson Junior High School. What year, Wes? 1957. What was the Jets Club? Junior Engineering Technology Society. 1957, Kingsport, Tennessee. That's amazing. Well, our post-war growth was spurred by polyester and plastic. Right? New polyester fibers, new plastics, all that other kind of stuff. We have a booming downtown, our central business district. And we start having new neighborhoods. And I'm sorry for not putting up more of Bloomingdale, Lynn Garden, all this, but I grew up in Colonial Heights, and I'm telling the story. And you'll remember that my story was when I was a child at Miller Perry School, my address was Route 1, Fordtown, Tennessee. And I remember when we got a street address. And I also remember when then Mayor Hugh Rule said when they annexed out to Fort Patrick Henry Dam that Kingsport would never go over that bridge. Okay? So people had to live somewhere. And everything within what was the city limits had essentially been built up. So we start spreading out. And we become a little metropolis of ourselves. We have these communities that aren't Kingsport, but they identify as Kingsport. Okay? They're not in Kingsport. I didn't go to Dobbins Bennett because I couldn't, because I wouldn't, because they wouldn't let me go. Because I didn't live in the city. Right? And that schooling was just for you city people. Okay? Then, we need a place to play. So when they built Fort Patrick Henry Dam, we got one of the very early state parks in Warriors Path. That's what it looked like back then. Not now. But one of the things that's extremely important in any city for its quality of life is having some place to play. All right, I got to hammer down here. Then we're going to get to superhighway. You know it better as Stone Drive. Okay? That's the superhighway. Ken Marsh is telling me a story about they built it, then they didn't pave it. Right, Ken? Have I got that right? They built it, didn't pave it. They didn't get money for it, so we had to wait for the money to pave 2 miles or something of it. Unpaved for 12 years. But then when it was paved, here's what happens. 11 doesn't run through town anymore. Just like a railroad passing you by. Right? The traffic is not coming down this way. The traffic is going back over there. So our new commercial developments and all that kind of stuff start happening somewhere off the track, not here. And when that started happening, when you start looking at, this is a turning point, when you start looking at not having your businesses in the town center, then you've got a turning point. You spread out. You don't have a central commercial district anymore. Remember this? I do. Another football day for me. I was practicing with my boys club football team, and the ground shook, and my mama cried. But she didn't know everybody kind of knew what happened. Blew out every window in town. If you were here then, you knew it. But it was a turning point for this community because we realized that what we have is a high reliability organization, and something little going wrong can make something big go wrong. And we'd never paid attention to that before. Now we're going to talk about the story we don't tell. We were a segregated city. We were systemically segregated. Segregation was legal, segregation was enforced, and segregation was very much a part of our culture until the mid-1960s when we integrated the schools here. Many of you may own pieces of property, and in the deeds of that property it says you cannot sell it to a Negro if your deed predates a certain time. Okay? That's part of our history that we have to belly up to. But when we changed it, it was a turning point. It was not just a turning point for the white community, it was a turning point for the black community. Because as much as we need to integrate schools, they had a school that was the center of their community. Just like other communities have schools that were the center. And instead of putting a white school in a black neighborhood, we moved the black kids to the white schools. And we left their school empty. And it deteriorated their neighborhood. Okay? That was a turning point. Good story, bad story. Bays Mountain Park, probably one of the best things ever happened here. Right? Literally a crown jewel. But think how the nature of that, just how's that for a play on words, has changed how we think about Kingsport. With that as a park, with that as an integral part of who we are. That's a turning point. Just the idea of going up there and getting away from it all. Then we got another logistic thing. We got 181 opens, and once again, dagnabbit, you can't even see the city from the interstate. Really? So what do? That's a turning point. It's great to have the highways for the logistics for moving things in and out, but it's moving us again. So what do? We have Fun Fest. Well, that's one thing we can do, but we do a lot of other things. But this Fun Fest thing was a community unity, how it all started, because there were some kind of tensions going around. And the idea to bring us together is one. And now look at the size of Fun Fest. Unbelievable what this done. Eastman gets a divorce, right? 1994. It's the same year you all started. And we're on our own because our main money train has just disconnected itself from its main money train, which has forced it to become more innovative to survive. And fortunately, we have the human resource capacity to do that. And we're still here today, aren't we? Then we have new places to stay and play. When I travel and people ask where Kingsport is, and I talk to them about Kingsport, and I say we're the global headquarters of Eastern Chemical, we do this, we do that, and by the way, we have a Marriott resort. They go, really? It's a turning point. It's a turning point for us. But again, it's something we had to do something close to that interstate. That's not a bad thing to see from the interstate. It's a golf course when you drive through here. And then the Y and the Aquatic Center, just an absolute, it's a globally first-class facility. And it's right here in Kingsport, Tennessee. And it's a turning point for us, not only for the health of the people that live here, but as an attraction point for people who may be looking at a place to live. Whoop. Oop, am I going the wrong way? I'm clicking wrong here. All right, I'm going to stop on this one. The last one is the one where the turning point that leads us into the future, and you're sitting in one of them. And education is how we up the ante. That somebody's going to be sitting here 30, 50, 60 years from now talking about what we did that turned things. One was making higher education more available here to people who live in Kingsport and around Kingsport. And another is the investment that this community made for a new science and technology learning center at Dobbins-Bennett, which is world class. It's second to none. It's an amazing thing. And as long as people invest in our future, we'll have a past that we can brag about. I've enjoyed being with you. I'm open for questions. I probably talked too long. I normally talk for 20, 25 minutes and then shut up. But thank you all for